Ooh. In this video, everyone, who did we use to import our Daihatsu Tanto Custom RS? What were the costs? Would I recommend them? What are the things to look out for? This is our little story of how we did it. I have a piece of paper just to remind me of certain dates and certain things that we did. So way back on the 17th of January 2022, I first contacted a company called Just Japanese. Now I'll put a link in the description below the video for everyone that I mentioned today. So I contacted Just Japanese. It was by email to start with. I think they're in Wigan. And a chap called Matt come back to me. Now I think it's fair to say, and I think Matt won't have any issue with me saying on camera, they tend to, the cars that they import, they have a setup where the cars come to the UK, to their office in Wigan. They get them all prepped, detailed, everything's done, it's all registered, and basically you go there and you buy a car. Now, I'm sure that if you ask them, which is what I was doing with my inquiry, to try and get a specific car, they'll do their best to do that. But when I contacted Matt, I would say it quite obviously they hadn't imported one of these before, and I wasn't totally convinced that he really wanted to go into that on the basis that they hadn't done one before. But anyway, he said he'd have a look. Well, in the meantime, after I'd messaged him, I happened to notice on their Facebook page that they had a K truck. So, well, I got excited then, of course, because if they've got a K truck, then surely they can get a K car. So I ended up speaking to Matt on the phone, and he was very polite, wanted to be helpful, but I just didn't pick up the vibes that he was going to be the chap that we could actually use to get the car. So anyway, we left the call at that, and he said he'd come back to me. Time passed, and then I thought, let's see who else I can try. So you do the research, as we all do, of course, and you look at the reviews, and you hope that the reviews that you're looking at are genuine and they're not fake, paid for reviews or whatever. And I come across JDM Auction Watch. Again, the link will be in the description below, everyone. And I think it was, yeah, it was an email that I sent originally to a guy called Patrick. I think he's one of the owners of JDM Auction Watch. I sent the email on the 24th of Jan. I'll put an image on screen now of that email, because I was very specific about the car that I wanted, pretty much down to the colour and certainly down to the specification and the approximate year based, depending on price. Now, Patrick came back to me really quickly on the email, and after a bit of a chat, we agreed, I think it was the following day, that I would give him a call, and because it's always better to speak to someone, isn't it, rather than just dealing with emails and messages. I'm sure you'd agree, everyone. So I had a chat with him the following day, and you know when you just pick up a vibe that someone is really passionate and keen to help out. Now, Patrick did say to me on the phone call he hadn't actually personally imported a Tanto before, but it didn't faze him in any way, shape or form. He was kind of, I guess, up for the challenge. So with that in mind, I left it with him, and that was the 24th of Jan. On the 26th of Jan, so just 2 days later, him, or should I say a source that he has in Japan that's always at the auctions, I guess, in Japan, or at least one specific auction in Japan, had found a car that matched my criteria. And Patrick duly sent me through some pictures of this car and what it would cost if I wanted to get it over to UK. I looked at the pictures, it ticked all the boxes. Patrick had obviously looked at what I'd asked for and got exactly what I asked for, so I take my hat off to Patrick for that one. And the deal was done. So when we say the deal was done, what happens next? As he checks his list. So I then sent a payment of £500 as a deposit to Patrick. But then, and this is the bit, I think, we live in a world, don't we, where it's better to not trust anyone until you absolutely know for certain that these people are genuine. So obviously I've done a lot of research for JDM Auction Watch, but you still sort of, I don't know, how can I say, you always feel like you're still taking that slight chance, because you're going to be paying out some, or you're probably going to be paying out some big numbers, and you're not really got anything to, well, you've got nothing to show for it whatsoever. So anyway, we paid an additional £5,000 then prior to shipping, because at the end of the day the car had to be purchased, and therefore the car, being the bulk of the cost, had to be paid for. I understood this, but I do think when you're watching this video, you'll understand that if you've never dealt with a company before, JDM Auction Watch looked professional, sounded professional, the reviews all but perfect. You want to trust it, and at the end of the day, to get the car here, I had to trust it because I chose to use a company to do all the paperwork. You can, of course, import a car yourself, but I didn't want to go through that hassle of dealing with all the different paperwork. So anyway, paid the £5,000. When this Tanto got to Nagoya, which of course was the port that it would then sit at until it got onto a ship to Southampton, Patrick sent, or should I say his colleague that he has there, takes loads of high resolution pictures, which is what was agreed on the initial phone call anyway. They took loads of high res pictures. I'll put them on screen now. Even of the underside of the car, the oil on the dipstick, the VIN number, lots of pictures, and particularly pictures of little marks, scratches, etc. You got the impression that JDM Auction Watch wanted you to be absolutely sure of what you were buying, on the basis that of course you couldn't physically see it in the metal itself. And I really rate JDM Auction Watch for that. The pictures were fantastic. You'll have seen them by now on the video, and hopefully you'll agree they were really good. So then of course you don't hear anything, and unfortunately during 2022 there was quite a lot of things going on. The world was still catching up with COVID. There's a lot of supply chain issues. A certain ship had blocked the Suez Canal, which I know caused a huge, horrendous backlog. And of course, the ship that was going to transport this car to Southampton would be going through the Suez Canal. So I think, and I'm sure Patrick would agree with this, that the time scale that I'm now going to mention isn't typical of what you would expect if you was to use JDM Auction Watch, or anybody for that matter, to import the car themselves. But anyway, if you think that the car was purchased on the 26th of Jan, it didn't actually ship until I think it was towards the end of May. So the car really did sit there gathering a lot of Japanese dust for many, many weeks. But that, you know, nothing could be done about that. Patrick did keep me in the loop. It was what it was. Then of course the car finally boards the ship. The ship leaves Nagoya and it's on its way to Southampton. Albeit I didn't appreciate there were many other stops on the way, which I guess, thinking about it logically, I was a bit naive. Of course there's many stops on the way. But you do get a tracking link, which means I was at, and again I'll put images on screen now, which means I could always see where the ship was. It would tell me whether it was moving, and if it was, what speed it was going, or if it was moored. So I was able to see when it was going through the Suez Canal, I was able to see when it was going somewhere to Belgium, and then obviously eventually when it was going to Southampton. So the next and final payment to JDM Auction Watch was made, and I think this is something that you just have to do. When the ship is 10 days away from port, Patrick or one of his team will send you an email. They sent me an email saying it's about 10 days away. We need the final balance. The final balance was £1,650, so that took the price to £7,150 for this car, which was the exact price that was agreed at the very beginning before the car was purchased. So obviously Patrick had kept to his word on that one. He didn't sort of find any reason or way to add any additional fees. So at this point, of course, I still have no car. I've not seen the car in the metal, and I've now paid a company that I've never used before £7,150. Yeah, there's an element of trust there, isn't there? So of course the ship then arrives at Southampton, and Patrick, or one of his team again, sends me a scanned copy of a HMRC letter, which was dated the 26th of June, saying all tax fees and whatever have been paid, and the car was now legally able to be registered with the DVLA, which, if you're not in the UK, is basically the government department that looks after all vehicle registrations. So the car is now sitting at Southampton, and I'm a happy chap. Now, of course, £7,150 doesn't really narrow down what the car cost and what the fees cost. And that's the only thing that I haven't got a true breakdown on. But at the end of the day, we can do some rough estimations, because when you're shipping, you obviously have something called FOB, or I think it's free on board or freight on board, whichever, which can include agent's commission, transport fees, deregistration and export paperwork from Japan, etc. Then of course you've got the cost of the shipping. Then you may of course choose to have additional insurance. We didn't have that with this car. Then of course, as we've said, you've got the UK port fees and the import duty. Now the import duty, I believe, was 10% on that FOB price. So of course the cost of the car and whatever coming in. So I believe it was 10%. If anyone knows different, or if Patrick's watching and there's a correction to be made there, leave it in the comments below and I can update it with a pinned comment. But my understanding is import duty is around 10%, and then you've got VAT, which is the tax in the UK, and that's currently at 20%. So of course that's a lot to add on. I believe that Patrick's fees from JDM Auction Watch was £700 at the time that I imported this. But again, of course, remember, a video on YouTube can be years old. I'm not to know when you're going to be watching this video. It's always best to contact the business and ask them for an up-to-date price, of course. But I believe the fees for this car to use JDM Auction Watch, which basically gave me access to the chap that he has, or the lady that he has in Japan to find the car. They're dealing with all the paperwork. I'm literally doing nothing other than hitting a few buttons to transfer cash. And I wanted it that way. So then of course you think to yourself, well that's it then, surely £7,150. I've got a car that's 10 years old, one owner, under 40,000 miles, all good. No, because then of course it needs to be registered with a DVLA. Now of course you can do this yourself. I chose again to pay somebody else to do it for me. So again, there'll be a link in the description below for a chap called Lee, and his company is called LA Services. And Lee, his business literally is at sort of, you can see the ships in the port from where his business is located, which is logical of course, because his business relies on vehicles coming off the ship. When the Tanto arrived, of which I remember Lee saying on the phone, a phone call I had with him, one of the many phone calls I had with him, I remember Lee saying, yes, I can see yours. And I thought to yourself, yeah, you can see mine because it's the only odd looking one probably on the ship. But anyway, I believe when this car arrived, there was 30 other vehicles that Lee had got to get off that ship, get to his yard and slowly work through the process. So what cars need an IVA test? If the car is under 10 years old in the UK and it's imported, it will need an IVA test, which is kind of, I guess, a stricter MOT. But one of the key requirements of this test is that the speedometer needs to be in miles per hour. Now it doesn't matter from a mileage point of view, so this car still shows the distance that it's travelled in kilometres, and it shows 59,000 kilometres. But from the speedometer point of view, it needs to show it in miles per hour. Now of course, as this car came from Japan, they drive on the same side of the road as we do, so the steering wheel is on the same side, although the indicators and the wiper stalks are on the other way round. But of course the speedometer is in kilometres an hour. So where some additional delays happened for this particular purchase with my car was that there's typically two options to change the speedometer for the IVA test. The one is fitting a little box of tricks, which I know nothing of apart from it's a little box of tricks that is basically plugged into the car, and it fools the speedo needle, or it basically changes the signal to the speedo needle so that when it points at 30, let's say, which would be kilometres an hour, that 30 is now miles per hour. And then what would happen is Lee at IVA, at the LA Services, should I say, Lee at LA Services just puts a little sticker on the dash that says MPH, and it's all good. So that was done on this car, along with other little bits like making sure there's a fog lamp that works on the back. And again, Lee made sure that, well, what Lee did was, instead of hanging a little fog lamp below the bumper, which, let's be honest, always looks a little bit silly, but you see that on a lot of imported cars, he wired one of the lights in the tailgate to do the fog lamp, which is really cool, so it all looks OE, all looks standard. Anyway, from the speedo point of view, he fitted the box tricks. You book the IVA test, which probably took weeks to be able to get a slot, and then the car goes for its IVA test. So unfortunately for my particular car, obviously Lee took it for a test drive down the road to make sure that the change was working and everything, and it was fine. But when it went to the IVA centre, and they put it on some system where I guess I think they got it up to 70 miles per hour. The needle was bouncing around. So in effect, it failed its IVA test. And that meant we went back to the drawing board. So weeks had passed, and basically I'd still not seen the car. It had arrived, I think, as I said, at the end of June, start of July. I think we'd now got to September, probably near October, and I still got no car. And remember, I'd first contacted JDM Auction Watch on the 24th of January. So to be at the end of September, I was getting a little bit bored. So bored, in fact. Maybe to rest my mind, I don't know. I'd asked Lee, and he kindly did this for me, to send me some pictures of this car sitting at his place, just for reassurance, because it comes back to what we said at the beginning of the video. There's an element of trust. You've paid out a lot of money, but you've not actually seen any evidence of what you've paid for. Lee, to be fair, obliged. Within minutes I'd got pictures of this car sitting in his yard. But because the time had carried on, and because Lee had said that we were going to have to go for plan B, which I'll show you and explain in a second, I thought, you know what? I know Southampton's a 3-hour drive. I'm going to drive to Southampton. I want to physically see the car. I want to sit in it. I want to have a good look around it. And I was able, when I did go there and have a look around it, and I got all excited and I was buzzing, and I was kind of like, this is real now, it feels tangible. I was able to take the big thick handbook that had come with it home and not read it because it's all in Japanese. Anyway, so that was all good. So then Lee sent the dashboard pod off to a company, presumably in Southampton, and they did a decal. Now, as I mentioned in the reveal video, everyone, I'm really, really pleased with what they did with the dashboard. When somebody says to you, well, we'll put a decal on that will change it so it shows miles per hour and kilometers an hour, which is what a standard speedo would have in the UK, of course. You start thinking, well, what's it going to look like? I wanted the car to remain standard because I'm fussy. I want it to be the same as it left the factory. Well, my fears weren't needed, because when I went to pick up the car, and I'll put the image on screen of the before and after shot of the dashboard, the person that did the decal has done such a fantastic job. They have been able to mimic, they've been able to replicate the style of the numbers, so it all just looks OE, it all just looks standard, and it's all fine. So at the time of filming, and for this particular car, what did we have to pay for Lee's services? My understanding is that if it doesn't need an IVA test, but obviously certain things still have to happen, and it'll still need an MOT, and there's still registration documents and whatever to sort out to get a vehicle registration number allocated to the car, I believe that is around £600. Now, obviously for my car, it needed the IVA test, and it also needed, well, a couple of additional things. It needed a battery, because the little sweet pink battery in the image on the video now, everyone, that was fitted to the car before it left Japan, had obviously probably was old anyway, and it just didn't travel well. It hadn't been used for 12 months, so it's pretty much died. So there was the cost of a battery, and of course the cost of the IVA, and the cost of getting the dashboard updated. So the actual fee from Lee was about £1,100. So I guess, yes, if I sit back, you know, and look at it with a cold sort of like, what did it cost in total? Yes, I paid about, shall we say, £8,200. Now, you might be watching the video and think, £8,200 for a silly little K car. I don't see it that way. And the reason I don't see this that way is because, certainly at the moment, the price of used cars are absolutely shocking. This car is now 10 years old. If you ignore the odd scratches and the odd very, very small dent, all of which is going to be sorted, the car is actually in very good condition. The interior is in very good condition. It was only a one-owner car. It's done under 40,000 miles. So if you think of all those additional costs of shipping and the fees to JDM Auction Watch and all the work that Lee did for the IVA test, I don't think £8,000, I like to round it down, I don't think £8,000 is an extortionate amount for a car that works for a family of 4, should be very reliable because it's Japanese, it's a Daihatsu, so they should be all but bomb-proof, and it's just such a lovely car to drive. I think it's well worth £8,000. And it's well worth £8,000 because I love different. look at the fleet that I currently have. A little smart car, love it to bits. MG Metro, Rover 75, Citroen 2CV. I have some interesting cars that I just like different. I'm not a fan of grey and black Euro boxes, particularly SUVs. I think you know what I'm saying. Hopefully, I know I've gone on a bit. Hopefully that's given you a good idea of at least one of the options of importing a car from Japan. Now, I know I mentioned just Japanese at the beginning of the video, and I know that unfortunately Matt, for reasons that they would know, mainly I guess because they don't normally deal with such cars, were unable to help. But I know that as a business they get fantastic reviews, and ironically, if I ever decide I'm in the market for a Toyota Alphard, because I think they mainly import things like Alphards, Estemas and stuff like that, I would certainly not hesitate to go up to Wigan and have a look at what he's got, because he certainly gets a lot of good reviews, and the cars look like they've been heavily worked on, heavily detailed. It's all ready to go. It's kind of like what you call a turnkey operation. You go there, you like the car, you buy the car, you drive home with the car. But by the same token, if I was to import another car, I just wouldn't hesitate. I'd be contacting Patrick at JDM Auction Watch, and then as the ship leaves Nagoya, I'd be speaking to Lee again at LA Services, because both of those businesses have served me correct. They've served me right, and at the end of the day, my fears that we all should have about parting with lots of amounts of cash and not having anything to show for it, well, those fears weren't needed, was they? Because they're just good companies. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you found that informative, everyone. If you did, hit the thumbs up button, because YouTube really does like interactions from viewers with videos, and the more interactions that happen, the more YouTube promotes your channel. And if you're not subscribed, it is completely free to subscribe to, well, any YouTube channel, to be fair. So if you want to hit the button that's going to appear above my head in a few moments, it really would be appreciated, because again, it shows your support and it does help build the channel. Thanks for watching. If you're going to be importing a car, or maybe you've already imported a car, let me know in the comments below what you imported. Was it a K car? Was it a Tanto? Let me know in the comments below. Let me know who you used and whether or not it worked for you. Or maybe that you did all the paperwork yourself. I'd be really interested to read those stories in the comments, and I'm sure some of the viewers of this video would do the same. Have a good one.